writing is like cooking. You have to let things simmer. Stories have to simmer. Characters have to simmer, sometimes for years, depending on the book or the idea. And critique is the same way. It takes a few days, I think, to kind of like settle into our system so we can process it honestly and think about whether it resonates enough to make changes and what those changes might look like.
Welcome to the Write It Scared podcast. I'm your host, Stacy Fraser, a formerly repressed creative soul turned fiction writer, story editor, and author accelerator certified fiction book coach. At Write It Scared, we tell the truth about why writing a novel is so hard by acknowledging that most writers grapple with two stories: the one they want to put on the page to the best of their ability, and the often subconscious internal story that prevents them from doing it. This show is designed to help you identify and rewrite the internal narrative holding you back while you discover and write the story you want to tell and learn all the tools to help you do that successfully. Join me each week for a new episode where we'll talk about writing to deepen our understanding of the craft and of ourselves as writers. Writing a novel is an inside job that we do not do alone. Welcome to Write It Scared. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hey writer, welcome back to the Write It Scared podcast. I'm your host, Stacy. I have another guest episode for you today, and I'm talking with author and book coach Gabrielle Byrne. This was such a nourishing conversation. We talked about a lot of things, but we really focused on how to build healthy critique partnerships and what life inside traditional publishing actually looks like for an author. And we also talk about some mindset shifts that can help us let go and loosen our grip when we, find that we're hanging on to the story really hard, maybe trying to force things. Gabby offers a lot of very kind and grounded, generous wisdom, which remind us that we are not alone in the struggle. So if you've been wrestling with comparison or feeling stuck in your draft or wondering how to navigate critique or even the bigger publishing ecosystem, this is a great episode for you to tune into. I'll give you Gabby's bio in just a moment, but real quick, I did want to remind you that Draft It Scared, my small group book coaching program for writers who are working through story development or are in the drafting phases, is now open for enrollment. Spots are limited to 6 writers per cohort. So if you're interested in a group coaching environment to get your story on the page, figure out your characters, discover more about your plot, and enhance your conflict while you do it in a community of like-minded individuals where you get lots of support and have a good time, head on over to the website to take a look at the details. The website is writeitscared.co/draftitscared. The cohorts will kick off in mid-January and will run through May. All right, here is Gabby's bio. Gabrielle K. Byrne is a fantasy author and book coach living in the tangled wilds of the Pacific Northwest, where she has wielded words for more than 15 years. She is the author of Rise of the Dragon Moon, a Junior Library Guild selection, and The Edge of Strange Hollow, which Kirk has called spooky and thrilling with superlative world building. Gabby has worked as an editor, critique partner, and mentor for all kinds of writers, published and unpublished, to help improve their stories, including 3 years as a mentor in the now retired Global Pitch Wars contest. She has a master's degree in literature and a second bachelor's in environmental studies. She is currently taking coaching clients who write genre fiction, particularly fantasy, middle grade, young adult, and adult or romance. Gabby, thank you so much for coming on the Write It Scared podcast. I am delighted to have you here both as an author and as a book coach. I gave you a little bit of a bio, but before we dig into all the things that I want to ask you about, would you please share just more about your journey of how you went from studying literature and environmental studies to becoming both a fantasy author and a certified author accelerator book coach with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here, Stacy. It's so much fun to talk about writing with people who write, and talking craft is just always a treat. So I really appreciate the invitation. How did I become a published writer and a book coach? I mean, I am a reader and I have read voraciously all my life. I was very much one of those sort of meta kids that was into both big ideas and the metaphysical side of the universe, and fantasy spoke to that. And I didn't have a lot of friends, and so I read all the time. And as a reader, I started to do some writing that developed into just really enjoying literature classes and more reading. And when I studied in Scotland, I got very much into Celtic literature and the traditions and culture of folk stories and fairy tales. And very, very slowly, I started to write more and longer. And one day in my late 20s, I found out that there was a writers' conference in Seattle, near where I was living at the time. And I thought, oh, that looks really interesting. And people learning how to write, you can do that. And I went and they had an agent panel. It was kind of like a speed dating for agents where you could sit and pitch your book and they gave you a little pitch class, how to write a pitch. And from that moment on, I was completely obsessed. And I think just the leap from point A, I can write long form stories to, oh, this is the thing people do. And they can read your books and there's a path and this is the path or a path. So I got super obsessed and I just wrote books and started pitching things and got involved with writing community online through Write on Con and then Pitch Wars and NaNoWriMo. And yeah, it took me about 6 books, I think, to get my first agent, and then another couple books before I got a publishing contract. So I have 2 published books, I think, depending on sort of how you count the books I've written. I've written maybe like 12 or 13 books-ish, with some starts and stops and, some that are completed and some that aren't, but more or less 12 or 13. So, it's something you love and you need to love to do.
And how did you get into book coaching?
Yeah, coaching. That I think I can attribute in part to Pitch Wars. I was a mentee in Pitch Wars many years ago. I think it was 2015. And then I became a mentor. And I was a mentor for about 3 years. And I loved it. I loved working with writers and I loved sort of helping them have aha moments, both in terms of their craft and then in terms also of their story. And a good friend of mine who's been a critique partner for a decade or more now, I think, is a book coach with Author Accelerator. And she told me how much she loved it and how great the program was. And I really wanted to continue with that work. And so I very slowly sort of completed that course to have a framework that I felt confident about. And so now I'm a coach and I adore it. I love it.
What do you tend to gravitate towards with your coaching?
I mean, I primarily coach fantasy, although it's for all age readerships. My published work is in middle grade, upper middle grade, but I coach YA, I coach adult. I'm working on an adult myself right now. And then I also coach a lot of romance because I read a lot of romance. So I love rom-coms and I love, both spicy and cozy. I've done some mystery, but I'm primarily focused on fantasy. Yeah, that's my where my heart is.
Mm. So, did you always want to pursue traditional publishing? Did you ever consider independent or?
I didn't. I really didn't consider it. And it wasn't, it was almost like that was just my default. I've since, now I know a lot of indie published authors and I know some self-published authors, and there's good reasons for taking those paths. And especially because post-pandemic, publishing as a whole is such a different creature. Just as a business model, it's very different. It's not an easy place to reside. So there are lots of good reasons for going indie, and I didn't. I just sort of took this path that I saw laid out before me from that first writers conference and sort of ran, and it's worked for me, but it's definitely not the only way.
Oh yeah, and the publishing landscape whether it's independent or traditional is
Mhm.
continuously changing,
That's right. Yes.
So
Yeah, it is.
so you never know, but there's always more than one way to skin a cat, right?
Correct.
So, I would love to talk about, I mean, here you are, you've written, I don't know, I think you said 11 books, right?
A bunch.
Maybe
A bunch
12.
of books.
So, what has your writing process been like, and how has it evolved over the years and with each of these, not maybe not with each book, but just
Yeah,
what can you extrapolate
yeah, yeah,
from
yeah.
the process of writing all these books? Because
Yeah.
that's a lot of books, my friend.
It's quite a few books. You're not wrong. I mean, what I can say sort of definitively is that I started out concretely in the plotting zone, right? Like I was a plotter. And I think part of that it was, I'm very Virgoian. I like to have a plan, but also it was, I mean, it was very much a comfort food. It's the comfort food of craft to have a plot laid out,
Hmm.
or to have even the character sketches, right? Like planned out. And it feels like a safety net. And so when I first started writing, I plotted the heck out of my books. And I stuck to those plots. And as time has passed and more books have been written, I've embraced allowing things to evolve and be a little more organic. I would not say that I am now a pantser. I'm not a pantser. I like to have still a kind of a framework for my books, but they're much more touchstones. And I do a lot more work on the characters and the world than I do on the plot itself. I like to have those tied together in some way. So you have like an internal arc and an external arc that work together, but I let myself assess it constantly and make changes constantly. And so it still works to feel kind of like a safety net. Like I have some next steps I could take in this story, but I really like to encourage people to go back to what they have planned as they're writing because it's okay to make changes based on what you learn about your characters as they move through the story landscape.
What did you find was kind of your catalyst for allowing that? Did you identify a problem, or did you feel like that kept things too rigid for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a combination of those things. I mean, certainly there is no book, no zero draft without story problems. Like that is a thing that doesn't exist.
Aw, really?
I'm sorry to say, right? You will find story problems and you will find rabbit holes that you have fallen into. And, you will find characters that are, acting improperly.
Or just things you didn't think about because your focus was somewhere else.
Yeah, well, you're just trying to get, from point A to point B and have a manuscript that you have written, right? That's like the overarching goal, write a book, right? Here's a premise or here's a character or here's a scene that made me want to write this story. I want to put it on paper. I think often it was the rigidity. I think it's a really good word for it, because unless you allow your characters to grow in the ways that come through your heart, they can start to feel pretty stilted, and your plot can start to feel pretty stilted and just too rigid and contained. And also, you can force a plot point that just doesn't work. You thought it would work and it doesn't work. It doesn't have the emotional impact that you thought it would, or it doesn't turn things in the right way, or it's landing at the wrong time in the story. So, yeah, I think just allowing yourself to sort of flow. I have this metaphor that I often use with my friends when we are stuck on something, right? Or, you hit that sort of writer's block, which is just another way to say it's time to let go of something and reassess things. I always think of writing as falling into deep water, and that in that you have to kind of like take a deep breath and relax and let yourself rise and float down and flow through the story. And if you're struggling or you're trying to get to some other place or you're fighting the current of the story, that can really just make you unhappy and it doesn't do your story any favors, right? So I often, when I'm sort of hitting those reassessment points, or my friends are hitting those reassessment points, or my clients are hitting those reassessment points, which can feel just really uncomfortable no matter who you are. I like to tell people, like, just try and immerse yourself and let things flow forward as if you were, as a writer, with the story in the river going whatever way it's carrying you. And that I sometimes find helpful as sort of a way to twist my thinking into a different perspective, you know?
Which can be such a struggle if you're driven by achievement, if you're driven by external markers like word counts,
Yeah,
or you want to be so far into the story, or what productivity looks like for you and how you identify that.
yeah,
That can be a very frustrating experience to let go and to have to take a step back and have to breathe. I know I have been like that, and it feels like I'm chomping at this bit and I can't get anywhere to get any purchase.
yeah,
And so it can be such a frustrating experience. So, what would you say to a writer who is putting a lot of value on the ability to produce words on the
yeah,
page when they're stuck like that?
yeah. In some ways, I think it's cultural, right? We're a very outcome driven culture, and it's hard not to be product oriented, right? Like, I want a book. I want a book in my hands. I want to hold it. I want to see it. I want to be able to show people this book that is mine that I wrote, right? And that does have value. That's important. Sometimes it feeds our hearts tremendously, right? But having that as your goal is an almost surefire way to take the heart out of your stories.
So true.
It's like a reverse magic, right? It just deadens your spirit and deadens, I'm being very dramatic about this, right? It deadens your spirit, deadens your ability to storytell because it takes the fun out of it. It takes the love out of that process. And that is what feeds the story. And it's also what feeds the writer, you know? And so you can't have, you know, like a starving person can't produce a book that feeds people, right? Like can't produce a story that feeds people. You have to be able to let go of that to some extent, right? It will always linger, I think, you know, because I think I don't know a single writer who wouldn't love to hold their book in their hands, right? All of us have that, but it cannot be the driving force because there are too many variables and there's too much outside of the author's control. So, you know, being able to just sort of allow yourself to love the work of storytelling and to love the process of following these people that you made up and watching them become people, you know, and watching that story sort of unfold sometimes in unexpected ways can be such a delight. And it can really feed you in some unexpected ways, I think.
I love everything that you said. A lot of times in my with my clients or in both in private and group coaching, there's this, and I feel it too for
Of
my own
course. Yeah.
work, right? I just had a podcast episode come out about, and it was talking about, what to say when somebody outside the writing world asks you, how's your work coming along? And what that often makes us feel, especially if we've been working on this thing for a decade.
Right. Yeah.
And, it tends to bring up some crunchy feelings because there's nothing to show. And there's
Right.
nothing to show for all the hours of the labors of love that we
Yeah.
put into and the sacrifice and the fact that we shut the door when our kids want something and we're
Yeah.
asking them to stay out there.
Yeah.
There isn't anything concrete. And so one of the kind of the focus point there is like, where are you allowing your value to be assigned? And are you driving that? Or are you letting society or expectations or your ego drive that?
Right.
We
Right.
have the power to take that back, and sometimes we have to do it minute by minute,
Yeah. For
hour by
sure.
hour, and pursue something we enjoy and we're curious about simply because we enjoy it and we're curious about it. And that in and of itself gives the process merit and value.
Absolutely. Also, there's all kinds of research now about how creativity reduces stress, you know, and is supportive of your health, your mental health, and sets a good example for your children and your peers, right? That you're caring for yourself in this important way by allowing yourself to have some creative space. And making that space for yourself, I think, can be its own goal, right? Like, and that can take a lot of the pressure off, which is so lovely,
It's like
right?
sitting in a beanbag. That's what it made me think of. It's like I'm sitting in a beanbag,
That one doesn't work for
just
me.
enjoying myself.
I know what you mean though, like a nice puffy cloud. I think of a
Yeah, something
beanbag and I'm like,
cozy and
I would
comfy.
not be able to get up out of a beanbag.
I
Get me
probably wouldn't
stuck.
either. But I think what we're saying here, what we're talking about is this idea that writing's a lifestyle.
Yes, it's a choice that we
It's a
make, a
it's a
lifestyle
it's a
choice.
choice and a lifestyle. And we get to decide how we explore that.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think sharing with people, when they ask those inevitable questions, and especially people that aren't part of the writing community and don't recognize how fraught it can be, right? Emotionally and just actually. I think answering those questions in ways that talk about, how much we love to write, like, and how it's a good reminder to ourselves too, that is a healthy, safe place to focus is
Yeah,
where we
the
are
meaning making.
loving the process of writing, of creating. It's important to us without exception, right? Or we wouldn't be here.
Mm. So this, I think, will bridge us nicely. This idea of speaking about our work in front of others
Mm.
and what it means to us. It brings up this nasty thing called imposter syndrome.
Yeah, right.
And a lot, I mean, I do. I struggle
Yeah.
with it. I struggle with
Yeah.
imposter syndrome. I struggle with comparison. Looking outside, I get distracted. I stop swimming in my own lane and have to be brought back, sometimes physically and forcibly by other people who love me
Yes.
in my writing community. But so what is your take on imposter syndrome in writers? And do you see that in your clients? And how do you help them?
Yeah, I mean we all have it. And I think it's partly again that sort of systemic issue we have of being outcome focused and product focused. And then, you know, it's important for all of us to celebrate our successes, right? And we celebrate our successes, however small or large, by sharing them with our community. And that's really important. The flip side of that, of course, is that when you're struggling, we tend not to share that as much. And so when we're hopping into community, especially on social media, what we're seeing is all of the small celebrations because those are the things that people have fun sharing, right? And want to celebrate with one another. And I think often struggling is a much more isolated affair, right? We might share that with our small group of trusted advisors or our family, right? That we're struggling in our lives or in our story or with our craft, but we don't shout about it, right? And when we do shout about it, people get overwhelmed quickly because everybody is sort of in their own struggle bubble, right? So I think it's sort of a setup,
I
if
love
you will. I mean, it's set up in a way that is not, it's outside of our control in many ways. And it's human nature to feel that striving, but also it's culturally encouraged to constantly be striving for more and better. And when we reach goals, we as humans, and I think particularly writers, set more goals, right? So there's always goals that we haven't reached and that we can put emotional weight on.
It's
And
very
so
double-edged sword in a
it
way. I
is
mean, it's expansive and wonderful and amazing. And it also feels like there's, I don't know, depending on your
hard.
personality, like, yeah, it's hard. Like you get to this little rift in the mountain and you thought you were at the top. No, no, no.
No,
And
right.
sometimes
Yeah.
that challenge is amazing and I love it. And other times it makes me feel exhausted.
Yeah. And I think they can exist in the same space because we're very strange creatures who can hold a lot of, opposing ideas at the same time. And the thing I think that has helped me with that, a friend of mine, Heather Kastner, who's a wonderful writer and friend, she's also just one of the most lovely human beings. And she is constantly like supporting other writers and, promoting their books or their successes, reaching out to them, checking in on them. She's just really like a
Mm.
very kind human. And she and I were talking about imposter syndrome one time, and I forget exactly what she said, but basically it amounted to, what makes her feel better when she's feeling low is helping other writers, is like reaching out and supporting other writers. And, it's like, oh, I like to do that, but I never thought of it as sort of a remedy for feeling shitty, right? And I tried it the next time I was really feeling pretty low, and I was like, hey, that's pretty good. You
Yeah,
know?
I think it makes you forget about yourself and your own problems. In the communities and the circles that I travel in recovery, as one of the
Yeah,
pillars is like
yes,
the key to helping yourself is actually helping others.
right.
And, just shifting your lens around a little bit. So I couldn't agree more. And that is part of the impetus for the podcast. The reason behind it is
Yes,
one, to talk about the reasons writing is hard, not just on the external, on the story side and the craft side, but on the emotional side that very rarely we get to see because
right.
we are bombarded by all the success stories and that is tends to be where we put our focus,
Yeah,
is getting to the end of whatever instead of being in the meat of the process. And so talking about those things and normalizing the crunchy feelings that come up, like
right.
comparison and imposter syndrome,
Yeah,
and not having it work out,
right.
not getting a publishing contract until you're 11 books in, despite having an agent and
Yes,
subbing with two other
right,
books, right?
right, right.
That's the truth.
That's the truth.
And so that is what I think it's really important to share with the world, because then it takes the playing field, and I think it just allows everybody to take a big deep breath and go, you know what? I am not alone. And maybe I'm not so different.
Right. It makes the that feeling,
Of unity
it's
and
universal, right?
spirit. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think too, it's a good reminder that no matter where we are in the process, like there are best-selling authors that get rejected, right? Or that, get their movies shut down, or that are struggling with some kind of, another friend of mine is recovering from a brain injury, right? And has had to relearn how to write. So there's just all kinds of struggle in being a human and in being a creative, and tapping into the community to remember that is it's a balm, right? For when you're feeling that drive to out achieve people, right? Which is sort of what that boils down to. It's not always just, I want to achieve this, it's, I want to prove it,
Yeah.
right? I want to myself or to whomever. And that's just such a hard place to live for very long, right?
Right.
In that feeling.
Yeah. And I think one of the best things we can do is just work on becoming very self-aware,
Mhm.
of motivations, what's driving us,
Right.
and embrace the fact that we're flawed
Yeah,
and
that's, I think,
we're gonna mess up.
yeah, I think that's a really important point, actually, just being very kind to ourselves, and we can remind ourselves to be kind to ourselves by being kind to others. That could be a good
Mhm.
sort of impetus to remember that the best way to achieve things is not ever going to be through, bombarding ourselves with criticism or,
Right. I've never been able to beat myself happy. It's never
yeah,
happened. Not
yeah.
once.
Yeah, and I don't know, it doesn't work externally and it doesn't work internally, right?
Right?
Like it's just
That's
not
what
a
I mean.
recipe
Right.
for success.
Yes.
But it can be hard to let go of, right? Because that's our instinct, is like to force something. And often, it's that flow. It's that like letting ourselves drop into that deep water and just roll, that can loosen up the story and can help us achieve our goals. It's anti-intuitive, I think, in a lot of ways, right? We want to grip it tighter to make it work.
Yeah.
And it's often the letting go of it that really lets the story rise, or the characters rise, or your star rise.
So let's transition a little bit. You've walked the road of the traditional publishing process, and I'd just
Yeah.
like to know what that process has taught you about just the dedication and persistence and managing expectations, because I am sure that is tricky.
Yeah, it is for sure. I mean, publishing is surprising in so, so many ways. I think without exception, it's the business of it shocks new writers, right? Like as you're entering the publishing industry, just how truly it is a business is quite shocking, I think. And all of the decisions, are really pretty much outside your control. Your agent is a really important partner in protecting you in a lot of ways. But the other side of that, the fact that publishing is this, sort of big business, huge entity that we don't have a lot of control over, is that the people in publishing, like the editors and the publicists and the people that are like, you know, walking the walk and really involved in the stories that they're working on, are so wonderful. They love stories. They love writers. They love helping to, bring these things to life. And that can be just a super lovely experience. And so,
They're
and
like the humanity of the machine
yeah, that's a good way
in
to
a
put
way.
it. Yeah,
The
and
heart.
yeah, it has a heart. It has a heart.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, the little moments can be very disorienting, and it's not the end all be all, and again, like there's always more. There's always the next, you get then the next story, or then the next, attempt to promote your story or market your story, or, talk to this person or that person. Like there's just an endless stream of goals. And so I think, again, that brings you to loving the work as a remedy for all that sort of disorientation that happens over time. Or, it's a constant learning experience, really. You're coming up against new challenges throughout the process and learning new things about publishing as an industry throughout the process. And a good place to go and focus and regain sort of emotional equilibrium is the work, even if your story is never whatever you happen to be working on at that moment isn't, and going to end up on a printed page.
What's your editorial process like with your editor? Like, how many rounds do you go? I suppose it depends on the book, but
Yeah, yeah, and the editor for sure. I mean, I've had two, my second agent, my first agent was not super editorial. My new agent is quite editorial, and that's really fun for me. He's, worked as an editor in publishing houses, so he's really a good editor, and it's fun to learn from him. And usually for my books and for most of the authors I know, there's two rounds of developmental editing, and then a round of line editing, and then a round of copy editing. And that is after your agent has gotten their hands on it at least once or
it's
twice
just
and
so amazing to me.
partners.
I mean, on this side, we work so
Yeah.
hard to make
Yeah.
these books as perfect as they can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect as they can be, and then we get them to an agent, and then we change it, and then we and then
Yeah.
if they get purchased, then we change them some more.
Whole
It's
different thing.
just I mean, so I think therein lies lies. Well, another guest said it so beautifully. She's like, you don't have to be perfect to be published.
You do not. You
Yeah.
can, I mean, you can't
You
be.
can't. I mean, I think that demonstrates the point right there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
still, there will be things.
Oh,
Still.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, every author I know can look at their published work and be like, oh, I wish I'd done that. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that is so real. And I find some comfort in the idea of people sitting around the fire and telling stories, and how, sort of oral tradition has changed over the eons, one story becoming a different story over time. I feel like storytelling as a whole is a sort of communal thing that we do as humans, right? Stories change and evolve, and the reader takes from each story what they love, and and can develop it or own it in their hearts, right? And so it's no different with publishing a story. It's everybody wants to be a part of that story, and they are. And they are, because of the nature of how a book is published. Like you have a whole team of people from your very first readers, your friends, your critique partners, your agent, your editor. Then you've got, usually it's a staff of copy editors and other line editors who get their hands on it, the artists, you know, the
Mhm.
cover designer. Like there's so many people involved in creating a story that comes out to the public that it really does feel like a communal
Yeah.
experience.
Sharing your experience about working in the traditional publishing landscape
Yeah.
and what that's been like for you. Let's go back and talk about process for a bit. And
Okay.
let's go back and dive into the deep waters of the beautiful ocean that you painted for us earlier. So, if you want to write books
Mhm.
and you want to write stories and you want to love it and get good at it, what are some of the things that you need to do?
Yeah. I at some point long ago, I started working on a workshop that I can give to various and sundry audiences about what it takes to write a book. And at that time, I came up with sort of a list of words, and I realized that they all started with P. So, so it's the three P's for me, which is practice, right? You have to practice, and I include reading in that category. You have to be persistent. You can't stop. If you stop, that's like the only surefire way to not have your story completed and or published, right? So you have to be persistent and you have to have a lot of patience, which is not something that comes natural to me personally. That has been a huge challenge for me to find a way to be patient. I am a very driven person and, I think it's taken a really long time for me to recognize that that patience lines up with the persistence, right? Like you
Mhm.
just have to, and it's what we've been talking about, loving that process, loving the writing, allowing ourselves to let go of,
Outcome.
externally placed outcome. It's just about being persistent and putting words on the page. I think there's some evidence that playing could also be added to the P words, you
And
know,
maybe partners.
and partners. Yeah, I mean,
We can keep going.
it's a whole extravaganza of P words, a plethora of P words, if you will.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah, I think, I do think reading is really important. And I often tell my clients that, when they're feeling burnt out or when they're feeling disoriented about the work that they're doing right now, which I think happens for all of us, especially in the middle of stories, we can really become like, what the heck am I doing? Like, what
In the
even
middle
is
of editing, revising
Yes,
it
yeah,
again.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a natural part of the process. But sometimes, or even just when we're just burnt out in life, right? Switching genres, reading something unexpected, allowing a good friend to give you a recommendation that you wouldn't normally read. I have been having a graphic novel extravaganza this year. So, I think just allowing ourselves to sort of absorb into story, audiobooks, podcasts, whatever. The medium isn't important. What's important is, letting yourself fill your cup again. And I think that's a really good way to also be improving craft because we as humans naturally sort of analyze what we like and what we don't like. And a good friend of mine, I did this exercise with her. I don't know where it originated. It didn't come from her, but Gita Trelease suggested that we make a list of the things we love in in stories that we read. I love like rainy nights. I love twins. I love, rocky shores. I love super conflicted sibling relationships. I love, luxury makeovers. Like, I mean, just making a list of the things you love all the tropes you love to bump into, all the scenes that you love, the sort of sensory details. I love the smell of petrichor, right? Like, just a list of things that you adore, and then writing a scene with a couple of those things that you love can
Mhm.
sort of be a good jumpstart when you're feeling uninspired and just lost in your work.
I love that. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, and it can help us, like what we love to read, when we are loving what we're putting on the page, that comes through to the reader too.
Hmm.
It's so often a way to really amplify our story when we start to write things that we love
Yeah. Or hate, honestly.
or
Like,
hate. That's
that comes through too.
yeah,
When,
yeah,
yeah. But I think the deeper you feel it yourself, the
exactly.
more the page can embody it, the more that
Right.
you can put it in there. And I
That's
don't know what voodoo magic makes that happen, but I do know that it works. One thing I wanted to make sure I asked you
mm,
before we wind down is you found your way in through a writing conference that led you to being a mentee in like the things like pitch wars, and then later on became a mentor yourself, and a
right.
lot of those things involve the critique process and giving your work to
Yes,
other people.
yes.
So
That
could
was
you speak a little bit about how a writer can best utilize working with a critique partner, when that is a good idea, and how to manage the relationship?
yeah. I mean, I think critique partners are vital. You don't have to have a ton of them, but one or two, three tops, I would say, critique partners that you trust to read your work and be honest with you and and at the same time give you encouragement. Right. And that's a difficult balance. And finding somebody that you trust to read your work is a process, right? It doesn't happen overnight. Like just like finding people, trusted people never happens overnight. You build trust over time. And that is true for critique partners also. In terms of when that happens, I think that probably varies a little bit from writer to writer. Some people really feel strongly that they want a completed draft before somebody reads it, or they want to feel pretty good about it themselves before it's read. And I have worked with writers who really want early critique to kind of help them guide where the story is going, and both
Mhm.
work just fine. It just very much depends, again, on your relationship with your critique partner. I think in critique, it's very important to sort of not get salty with people. It's hard to receive criticism. That is universally true. Criticism is hard. It's also really hard to give criticism. And for that to be a growing experience for both partners, I think there's a balance between encouragement and being clear about what you think isn't working. And on the receiving end, it's really important to just say thanks for all of this time and energy that you've put into thinking about my work. And then I encourage people to just say the quick thank you when they get that feedback, and then step back and give themselves a day or two to process. So often when somebody offers me critique on my work, I'll say, I really appreciate this so much. I can't wait to dive into your comments. I'll let you know if I have questions or I want, to talk more with you about it. And that's it. And then I
Mhm.
take a step back and I read through the critique and I let it settle. I think, writing is like cooking. You have to let things simmer. Stories have to simmer, characters have to simmer, sometimes for years, depending on the book or the idea. And critique is the same way. It takes a few days, I think, to kind of like settle into our system so we can process it honestly and think about whether it resonates enough to make changes and what those changes might look like. And then we
Mhm.
can go back to those partners and talk about it, right? Like can you explain this a little more, or let what are your thoughts about how I could solve this particular story problem, right? And that's how we grow as writers, and that work is reciprocal, right? We grow when we critique, and we grow when we are critiqued, and it's really a special kind of friendship.
Can you think of any immediate signs that a writer should bail out of a critique partner relationship? Are there any red flags?
Yeah, there are. I mean, the reddest of the red flags is when somebody cannot receive critique, right? When they are up in arms about it, or fighting you, let's take
Right.
it to the
Saying you don't
street.
understand my vision.
Yes, yeah, yeah, you're wrong. You're wrong about your critique. That's never something you want to hear from a critique partner. Or, yeah, I mean, you just don't want to, because it's an indicator that the person isn't open to growing, right? It doesn't mean necessarily that your critique is correct. I don't think critique, you know, often critique isn't like right or
Yeah,
wrong.
it's
It's
subject.
what
It's
resonates and what will improve the story in a way that makes it stronger and more emotionally powerful, right? And I think when folks are really resistant to critique, it's just an indicator that they're not ready to grow and to really sort of learn from the process of analyzing the critique, right? Of thinking through and processing that critique. So that's really the only red flag, I think. And it happens. It's fairly
and
common.
I think that's the probably the most important one to point out because I would not have known,
Mm.
if you took me back a decade ago, how to handle that.
Right.
I would not have
Right.
known as another writer that was a sign that maybe I should be walking away. The other stuff,
Yeah.
like somebody who's rude or mean or yada
Oh,
yada on the
sure.
page,
Yeah.
like, yeah, that
Never.
okay,
Never.
immediately walk away. But
Right.
that idea of someone who says you're wrong, I wouldn't have known how to handle that. So I think that's a beautiful point that you brought up.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and it does happen, right? And that's not to say that critique partners aren't wrong, right? They can be absolutely all the time. But, I think so much of it is about how we receive that effort, right? And that energy from somebody and then processing it to see what about this feel gave them this feeling. Like if they received it this way, then I need to look at like what part of the story is generating that confusion or generating that, disconnection from my main character, or where can I improve? And I think that sort of growth mindset, if you will, is really, it's important to being a successful writer in any capacity.
Do you have any recommendations for writers who are looking for critique partners as far as is there anything that you do through your book coaching services
Hmm.
to have people meet up, maybe that are writing
Yeah.
in the genre that you work within?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right that book coaching itself is a sort of amplified form of critique partner work. It's a large group of very dedicated and often, sort of very experienced writers who can provide that cheerleading, which is so important to people's sort of inner spirits, as well as the craft guidance and the story experience expertise to sort of find those pivot points that are so problematic in a lot of stories and build those up. I haven't done a lot of critique partner connecting, but in terms of resources for that, I know that obviously book coaches are a huge resource. I think also just getting involved still on social media can be helpful. A lot
And
of writers.
looking into your like whatever genre that you're writing in, whatever world that you're writing in, whether that's mystery or thriller or that's fantasy or
Mhm.
whatever, looking up the or romance, looking up some of the organizations that are behind some of those,
Mhm.
like Romance
Yeah.
Writers of America or International Thriller Society
Yep.
or mystery writing. I can't remember what the acronym for mystery writing is, or the Society of Children. Yeah, please say it for me. I
The
always mess it up.
Society of Children's Book Writers
Book
and
writers and
Illustrators.
illustrators.
Yeah.
SCBWI. So finding networking in those veins can definitely
Yeah,
lead you
yeah.
to the people who write similar things to what you
Mhm,
write.
mhm. And
And
there is an association. I mean, there's the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers
yes,
Association. There's a
there's
horror
Prism.
writers
There's
association, romance writers association, and they often have events as well.
where you can go meet
Workshops
people.
and where you can go meet people, where you can talk to and exchange ideas with folks. I mean, yeah, that's absolutely. And conferences, if you can pull them off, especially locally, is always a fantastic way to grow. I think, there are still ways to build writer community on Blue Sky. I don't know about Twitter. I myself am off Twitter at this point. But
I was never there.
yeah, I mean,
Not real.
it was kind of the heyday of writers community during Pitch Wars,
Yeah.
but has
I know a
since.
lot of people miss that. in
Yeah,
this pitch
yeah,
books.
yeah, absolutely. Myself included. And just, building that community over time, I think is really, really
Yeah.
valuable. I think
Yeah.
there's also, you can go to critique groups that often meet at libraries or coffee shops. It can be hard to track them down sometimes, but
Yeah.
they're around. And again, you don't need, a entire breakfast club of critique partners. Like
And it's
one or
overwhelming too
two.
if you get into a writer's community and six people are swapping pages and you have to give feedback on all of those. That's a lot.
Yeah,
That's a lot of heads to be in. I mean, a lot of
it
story
is.
heads to be in. So,
It is. And
and
you can
I
get a lot of conflicting advice, which can also be really confusing,
very
right? Which is
true.
why that like sort of stepping back and letting it be processed is important.
Yeah, and I just want to really quickly shout out to a mutual friend, Julie Arts, who is
Yeah,
an author and also an author accelerator certified book coach. She has a critique partner matching service.
which is
Um,
fantastic, by the
yeah,
way.
so I will make sure to link that into the show notes. And she definitely is in the speculative fiction world, but I don't think that her critique partner match service is
Mm-mm.
specific to that. I think
No, she
it
matches by
matches
genre
up
and
by
yeah.
genre.
Mhm.
So you might be writers who are looking for something like that might look into that. And I think it's free.
Yeah, she does it for free.
I think
That's
it's
right.
free. So I'll definitely drop that into the show notes. Okay, well we're wrapping up here, and I just have a couple of other questions. What wish would you like to impart to a writer out there who is listening who might be struggling with that grabby energy of wanting to get this done
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that heartbreaking place of being like it's probably never going to be enough? What would you say to them?
Gosh, it's so hard. I think I'd start with gosh, it's so hard, right? Like it's so hard. That is real. That is real. And none of us are immune to it. I think what I would wish for that person are in no particular order. I would wish for them to be able to visualize their success and then let go of it. I would wish for them to find a really good book that they love to read. I would wish for them to find community with other writers because that is where you become inspired again. That and, reading something that you love, that's where you become inspired again and recognize that you're not in this by yourself and that you're not, some untalented hack that can't do X, Y, or Z. You are a creative who is in the process of creating, which is painful and difficult, you know,
As much as it can be beautiful, it
as
is
much as
also
it
those
can be
things.
beautiful. Yeah, yeah, that's right. And it's a process that feeds you. And so you have to continue giving yourself that fuel. And that comes in the form of community and other work that you love, reading, listening to audiobooks, whatever, drawing, that creative energy. Yeah, and then I wish for them to be able to let go of that drive to get to the end,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and to just sort of learn to be comfortable in the doing.
You have been such a beautiful guest, and we
Oh,
talked for way longer than I anticipated just because I could just listen to the way you present ideas, and I can tell that you do everything with such a spirit of, I don't know, there's just a unity, a peace, a
oh,
together
thank
we
you.
go-ness,
Oh,
about
thank you.
you. And I really appreciate that. So with that, would you please share what you're currently working on, either as an author or as a book coach or both, please? And
Yeah.
then where can listeners find you and learn more about your book coaching services?
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, as an author person right now, I have a middle grade that is on sub, so everybody wish me well. I am working on and have been working on for quite a while now an adult fantasy. Currently, it's called Entanglement, and it's about the three fates and sort of family dynamics and sisterhood and what it means to be human.
Mm.
So it's a little complicated. as these things tend to get, but I'm really enjoying working on it, and that's keeping my creative juices flowing. And then with book coaching, I am loving just being able to work with clients to improve their stories. I mostly work with fantasy authors and romance authors of all stripes. So whether they're writing children's literature or adult, whether they're writing cozy rom-coms or spicy novels, I love all of that. And I do still have spots open this fall, a few. And if people want to find me and learn more about me, please visit my website. It's GK Byrne, which is BYRNE, gkbyrnebooks.com, or you can email me at gkbyrnebooks@gmail.com.
Well, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest, and
Pleasure.
I
I
hope
loved
we
I
get to
loved
cross
our
paths again
conversation.
soon.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much, Stacy.
Thank you for listening to the Write It Scared podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please make sure to hit the follow button so you never miss an episode. And please leave a review. Reviews help other writers like you find the voices and messages they need to hear to continue to write their stories. Let's lift each other up. Remember, you can be scared and still be unstoppable. I'll see you next week.